Give us a sense, from your point of view on the Foreign Affairs Committee, how great is the threat posed to the United States from national interest if, in fact, they do start enriching uranium again in Iran?
Well, I think it demonstrates they were never serious about this Iran deal in the first place. And it also demonstrates that our sanctions are starting to have an impact, a crippling impact on Iran. I think they're getting desperate. They're threatening the EU. A lot of these companies in Europe have decided to comply with U.S. sanctions rather than the JCPOA, the Iran deal. And so Iran's basically saying you got 60 days, throwing the gauntlet down to choose between the United States and Iran, and I think they're going to choose the United States. At the same time, you're seeing these threats to the United States military in the region, which I find very disturbing.
Well, what about that? Because we had a report that just crossed the wire just a few minutes ago. The intelligence on the new Iran threat is said to be very, very credible. This is by the acting Secretary of Defense, Mr. Shanahan. How powerful is that threat? Because that's, as I understand, why we're moving the aircraft carrier as well as a bomber group into the area.
I think it's very credible. I think it's real. I think that's the reason why the USS Lincoln is now being deployed to the Persian Gulf. We call it 100,000 tons of diplomacy. I think it will send a strong signal to Iran. But I also think the fact the Secretary of State made a special trip to Baghdad to reassure the Iraqis that the United States was behind them against Iran was significant. Remember that what they call the Shia Crescent that Prime Minister Netanyahu would talk to me about, that is Iran's expansion into Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, and then also in Yemen with the Houthi rebels has been very much an expansionism of Iran in the region and a threat to the region.
Okay, let's turn to China for a moment, if we could. Obviously, very much in the news because of the trade negotiations. There are also foreign relations issues involved here. As Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said recently during the Arctic summit that he went to over in Helsinki, this is what he said.
The United States and the UK cooperate a great deal on regional security in Asia as well. That cooperation will be all the more necessary as China tries to shift the global balance of power in its favor.
So, Congressman, quite over and above the trade issues that we know so well, what are the foreign relations issues right now with respect to China? How is that changing and shifting?
Well, in my recent visit with Secretary Pompeo, he described China as the greatest threat to the United States. I think if you look beyond the trade imbalances, when you look at the theft of intellectual property, the technology transfers, the One Belt, One Road initiative, where they this predatory lending practice they have throughout Africa, Western Hemisphere. They took over the port of Sri Lanka, built a military base next to ours in Djibouti, and they can take over countries economically without a shot fired. But in addition to that, David, when you look at the technology piece and the theft of intellectual property, that's significant. We're talking about artificial intelligence, quantum computing, things like 5G. In a lot of these countries, because we are not there, they want to put their 5G Huawei systems in those countries. Once they do that, they own those countries' data. And that's one of the things from a national security standpoint we're most concerned about.
Coming back to this hemisphere, let's talk about Venezuela, which unfortunately we have to talk about just about every day. There's a huge problem down there that you know very, very well. We had President Guaido actually talk to the Washington Post, and when asked about the possibility of U.S. military action down there, he said that it was great news to Venezuela because we are evaluating all options. It's good to know that important allies like the United States are also evaluating the option. How seriously is the military option on the table with respect to Venezuela at this point, sir?
Well, it's on the table, but when I talk to the administration, it's the last option. It's not. They want a peaceful transition of power. They want this to be the people of Venezuela. They want Colombia, Argentina, Brazil to unite with the OAS and the Lima group to really kind of lead the effort. There is a hospital ship going down there. There is a grave humanitarian crisis in Venezuela. David, I just came back a month ago from Cucuta, which is right on the border. 50,000 Venezuelans per day crossing into Colombia, and about 5,000 per day stay. And it's not sustainable to Colombia. It's a humanitarian crisis. Children are going without food and medicine. babies in cardboard boxes. This is one man, Maduro, that has caused this grave destruction to Venezuela, the socialist dictator. And I think the eventual plan is he has to go one way or the other. We do not prefer the military option, but all options are on the table.
It's one man, but we hear that maybe it's more than one man, and that in fact the Cubans are there to help enforce within the military, and the Russians are not too far behind. From your assessment, from your briefings and what you know about what's going on right there, how critical is the Cuban and ultimately the Russian support to Mr. Maduro?
It's very extensive. In fact, we talk about foreign intervention in Venezuela. It's really the Russians and the Cubans. The Cubans, with probably 20,000 security forces, literally back up Maduro and control their military. Remember, it all depends. If their military defects to Guaido, it's game over. And the Cubans and security forces in Venezuela are keeping the military on Maduro's side. And remember, Maduro is on the tarmac getting ready to leave Venezuela to go to Havana when the Russians literally stopped him on the tarmac from leaving the country. And so, we're dealing with some, it's a high-stakes game down there. We haven't seen this kind of Russian involvement in the Western Hemisphere really since the Cuban Missile Crisis.